evening and or morning, depending on where you're at in the world. Today is Tuesday, the 21st of April. I'm Brach Jennings.
And I'm Peter Clark.
And this is another COVID-19 edition of Stumbling Block.
And we're joined today by Lindsay Colwell, the Director of Youth and Family Ministry at St. John's Lutheran in Kasson, Minnesota. Welcome.
Hello. Hello.
Very glad to have you on our show, Lindsay. If my memory serves me, the first youth director we have had on this show, right?
That's
Peter?
Correct.
Wow. So this is an inaugural event. Yeah. I wanted to begin before we take full advantage of the gifts and insights that our guest has. I just want to say one brief thing of something very important that happened in Tübingen today. And that is the Tübingen Protestant Theological Faculty unanimously declared its support for queer persons and its support for same-sex unions in the church in the name of Christ. And that is decisive for me. And how they did it was, there is a pamphlet circulating in Württemberg by conservative pietists called, in English, "What God does not bless, the church cannot bless." It is a queer-phobic, bigoted, anti-scientific in the German sense of what theological science would mean, screed against queer marriages in an attempt to break up the church. And the Tübingen faculty, meaning the full professors in the fields, Old Testament, New Testament, church history, systematic theology, and practical theology, have said, no, this is anti-scientific, and this is anti-Reformation theology, and it's anti-Jesus Christ.
There you
go. I think, now the document is only available in German, so those of you who don't read German, you'll need to use Google Translate or something if you want to look at it. But you will find this document. This is the other thing that I think is so significant. You will find a link to this document on the main page of the Tübingen Theological Faculty's website before even the guidelines and updates about the coronavirus. You can't miss this. They didn't just sort of say it or hide it. It's there. It's public. The dean of the faculty, Volker Lepine, who was our guest on this show a couple of weeks ago, he has drafted the letter, but it is on behalf of the entire faculty, and that's what I want to stress. I think this is an utterly momentous occasion for Tübingen, a school that, at least by reputation, is known to be much more quote-unquote conservative. The last thing I'll say is the document is written in a scholarly German academic prose, everything you would expect from a research university, but Jesus Christ is there. And that, to me, is the most powerful part of this. This was not a good liberal notion of, this is about human rights. This is because of discrimination, since we are the Church of Christ. The point is the gospel, not the proof texting. I'm paraphrasing what they've said. Mm-hmm. But they're stressing this classical Reformation, Christocentric hermeneutic. And that's what, to me, makes it so powerful. If it was just, well, we're good, enlightened people of the 21st century, and so we believe, blah, 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 I don't really give a damn, frankly. Or even if it was, we follow the radical example of Jesus, any liberal can say that that's not as persuasive. What they did, I think, was much more powerful, and it proved that this faculty has teeth. And that, yes, they do scientific work, even metaphysical work. There's a professor here. I was so shocked when I found out this was unanimous, because there's a professor that specializes in metaphysics, but everybody unanimously. And I say to that, thanks be to God. And if Tübingen can do it, there is hope for, frankly, any theological faculty rooted in the critical tradition of Reformation theology. So thank you for letting me go on that soapbox, but I have been celebrating all day.
Nice.
It's exciting news.
So now that I did all this heavy Christological stuff, how are you, Lindsay?
I'm good.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am a Luther Seminary trained director of youth and family ministry, which is pretty unusual. I went to Luther Seminary and did an MA in the New Testament. I specifically, my MA concentrated around the person of Christ in the book of Revelation.
Oh, cool.
And then went on from there and did my Master of Theology at Luther Seminary, and did a lot more trying to fill in gaps, because I was hoping to head to a PhD program. And I did a lot of my work on Paul's offering that he took from his Gentile churches to support the Jerusalem church. And then a lot of the very boring stuff like textual criticism and that kind of thing. And so God had other plans, because the PhD thing just didn't work out, and that was okay. It was a big change, and it was pretty hard at the time. And I spent a year working at Luther Seminary, just kind of doing my thing still. There's been probably 2 different waves of people at Luther Seminary who know me as the person who ran the information desk for a long time. And I had the unofficial title of pastor to the pastors, just because I spent a lot of time listening and just being a listening ear for people when they were going through different things, and the struggles that is becoming a pastor, and all of the different hoops you have to jump through and all of that. And then in the fall of 2012, right a few months after I graduated with my MTH, my grandmother died, and my husband and I inherited her home in Rochester. And so we've been living here since 2013. This is my second church that I've worked in. And I work with primarily 7th through 12th graders.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So in my first position, I worked with high schoolers and young adults. And that was about an 18-month position that was part-time. And then I had my son, and I moved over to the church in Kasson full-time. And after some pretty dramatic shakeups in our congregation, where we lost both of our pastors due to just a lot of not getting along and some issues surrounding leadership of our senior pastor and things. And we had a 2-year interim. So at that point, I went from being kind of a assistant, like office assistant for confirmation, to leading confirmation and running the confirmation program. And for my 7th and 8th graders. And then I do weekly youth group and do a lot of things with summer trips, but then I also work with the Mission and Outreach Commission to do some of our mission stuff in our local area, but also worldwide. And then I do a little bit of work with growth and hospitality as well. So welcoming new members, how can we best reach out into the community, that kind of thing, be welcoming.
Who was your advisor at Luther?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that.
Who was my advisor?
Yeah.
So my advisor for my first degree was Dr. Craig Kester.
Okay.
And then I also worked with Dr. Mark Throntveit a lot for that one. I also spent a lot of time with Arlen Hulkren for New Testament. My advisor for my MTH was Mary Hinkle Shore. And I also worked very closely with Dr. Stephen Paulson in theology.
Really?
Yeah, I was his. I was actually, that was part of. I think that was part of the concern when it came to PhD, because I was making a switch from New Testament to theology, systematic theology, and that was kind of a bizarre thing, I think, for people in the academy to understand how I was trying to broach those two. But I was Dr. Paulson's teaching assistant for about a little over a year.
How did that go for you?
What, the teaching assistant?
Yeah.
Oh, Steve Paulson and I are very close. I haven't had a chance to talk to him for a while, but I did a lot of pushing against the man. He likes to. We had quite a bit of conversation regarding Revelation, in particular, because and then the year right after I finished my MA, I gave him a copy of my thesis, and he took it with him on sabbatical, and he came back and he told me I completely changed his mind about the Book of Revelation.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, well, that's nice. So that's cool.
Can you change his mind on gay marriage while you're at it?
There are lots of things that I would like to change his mind about, but I haven't had a chance to talk to him very much lately. But there are definitely moments when I definitely just close my eyes and I'm like, really? but I do appreciate that for the most part, like when it comes to one-on-one, he's one of those people who can actually have conversations with people, which is wonderful. And can really understand. I think it's hard when you do things that aren't in the particular. And I think that's true for a lot of things. Like there's always a story behind everything, and you can't simply just take what you're doing, your theology, and apply it to everyone, because it just doesn't work.
Well, and I have to admit, his I've read the first 2 volumes. The third isn't out, of the Luther's Outlaw God, and those are very, very powerful books. Even though I radically disagree with him on many points, if I say I loved those books, I mean in an adversarial, I would do this totally differently as a systematician. I loved those books.
Yeah.
I want to just public plug to everybody listening to us, read Steve Paulson's Luther's Outlaw God.
I need to read them. I know that in a time, especially at a time in my life when I needed pastoral care, he was one of the only people who actually gave it to me. So full disclosure, I come from a Wisconsin Synod Wells background.
Dun, dun, dun.
Okay. Welcome to the forward-thinking Lutherans.
Oh, yeah. Well, I went to Luther College, and then I went to Luther Seminary. So I was always sort of a forward-thinking Lutheran. But it was
Luther
a big...
Seminary is forward-thinking?
Compared to where I came from, yes.
Yeah.
So he has always been a very wonderful pastoral care presence in my life, which has been much appreciated. He actually did the recognition of baptism for my son. My son was born with a double twist in his small intestine and had to have emergency surgery at 24 hours old. And so, so I got to do the baptism in the hospital. And so when we did it, we did it at Luther Seminary at the Chapel of the Cross, and it was wonderful to be able to have someone who can preach in the particular to our situation and who knew us so well, and it was a very meaningful thing. Yeah, we agree to disagree on a lot of things, but he has always been a very influential person in my ministry, in particular, like how God will do anything to get to us, basically.
Amen. Yeah. That's and you can find that, I think, in his books. I mean, I felt I was struggling a lot. I mean, happy as I am in Germany, I was still struggling a lot over the holidays, and that's when I read Luther's Outlaw God, and I felt like he was preaching to me in the best sense of the word. I think he risks, frankly, I will say this publicly, I think he risks sounding more anti-Jewish than he intends to. But
yeah, probably.
But that's why I couch that more than he intends to. But I found that when I was reading those books, I was just captivated by them. It was exactly what I needed to hear. And that's the kind of theology. I call it theology that goes for the jugular.
That's for sure. Yep,
and
that's for sure.
In Germany, especially, that theology is much rarer, if used at all.
Sure.
Among the current universities. So
Sure.
Paulson's books were balm, even though I found, maybe as you're saying, radically disagreeing with him on a lot of things. But the core emphasis on proclamation, I think, is what he really gets.
Well, and I think if you can, I found this with Arlen Hultgren as well, like especially because he spent a lot of his career in ecumenical dialogue with Catholicism. And so I think if you can hold the core beliefs and be open to having, not necessarily agreeing or not necessarily taking things on, but being able to have those conversations and talk, like having difficult conversations. You don't have to agree, but you have to be able to talk about things and respect one another and move forward together somehow.
Yeah, I will say I think that was one of the things I really appreciated about the more conservative faculty at Luther Seminary, like Stephen Paulson, like Skip Sundberg, is that they were able to have those conversations. And, I took most of my history classes from Professor Sundberg.
Oh, I love Skip Sundberg.
He did not care if you disagreed with him as long as you could back up what you were saying.
Exactly.
In fact, one of his favorite students was an openly gay student.
Yeah,
but see, I would then ask the question, to me, particularly in light of the letter that the faculty in Tübingen has just put out. If that letter wasn't unanimous, if that letter said what Luther Seminary says, it wouldn't feel like my whole life in Tübingen has changed.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel like that letter changes everything for me as a queer person in terms of how I approach being at the faculty, studying at the faculty in terms of just writing a dissertation for the faculty, and the fact that, God willing, this will be my alma mater. Everything changes for me that is a unanimous assent. If these are full professors saying this, right? Perhaps some of the Privatdozents or the people who aren't necessarily full professors, maybe there are some that may disagree with it, but they actually don't get the right to make that statement. And generally, I would say that's incredibly hierarchical. But in this case, I think it's essential that all of the full professors have said yes to queer persons. So my question is, with people like Skip Sundberg, who, Peter, I know you have admired for a long time, and now Lindsay, I heard from you as well, and from Paulson, whose books I enjoyed, but I would never have studied with him when I was at Luther. Does my statement of what it means for a unanimous affirmation, what would that look like in a place that says, well, we agree to disagree? Because when people say that, you are agreeing to disagree about my humanity.
Yeah, no, and I don't think in that sense, I don't think that's something that you can say you agree to disagree. I don't think I would couch that as one of the things that would go under that category. I would consider that one of the core things that needs to be agreed upon. I think that at Luther, because I got pushback from people like Skip Sundberg when one of the other jobs I had at Luther was coordinating the weddings that happened at Luther.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my good friends who's queer had her wedding there at Muskego Church.
Oh, wow.
Margaret?
Yeah, and we did it. And we got some, pushback afterwards, but I'm like, in no place does it tell me that I can't do this. And so we're going to do this. And you don't have to like it. But I think it shows too, though, from some of the other things that have happened at Luther, like around the financial crisis that happened in, the early parts of 2012 and into 2013 and things. I think there were a lot of things that there wasn't any core agreement. I think they're working their way back from that, but I think, unfortunately, here in the United States in general, I think we suffer from a lot of the puritanical things that go along with it, and some of the things I even see it in my German Lutheran upbringing and the Norwegian church that I'm in. They're just this idea that this is the way we've always done it, and it's yeah, but the way we're doing it is not biblical.
Yeah, it's fascinating too. I think so. When I went to Luther Seminary, and this was actually part of the reason I went to Luther Seminary. It had this identity as a seminary that wasn't in unanimous agreement about everything.
Yeah,
and that was part of the appeal to me as someone who was still figuring out what was going on. And it's interesting. I recognize now in retrospect how that was damaging in some ways, how that probably contributed to some of the financial issues and things like that. But it's been really interesting to see the shift from when I started there to now, to even when you started there, Brach.
Yeah. Lindsay, I did my MTH at Luther under Guillermo Hansen and Lois Malcolm.
Okay. And I worked with Dr. Malcolm quite a bit too.
Oh, yes. Yes, lovely. Both of them. I owe a great to both of them. And I want to be clear. I love Luther Seminary deeply. And I'm able to say that because I knew that my teachers had my back. Because I only studied with them. I knew specifically that they had back. These other people you're talking about, I don't doubt that they're good scholars. As a matter of fact, I read some things by Skip Sundberg. More than good, great scholars. But I don't really care if you're a great scholar and you deny my right to exist. So and I think the only reason that I was able to thrive at Luther is by the time I got there from 2015 to 2017, the shift had started where it was much healthier. Peter, if I had started when you did, and Lindsay, I'm a bit too young to have been there to be finishing in 2012. I would have been starting in 2011.
Okay.
And that is when I started. I did my MDiv at PLTS.
Okay.
But Luther Seminary in 2011, as a queer person, ain't no way. I ain't going near that.
Well, and by 2011, it had actually improved quite a bit from when I started in 2007.
It had improved quite a bit, but still not enough.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I think what you're saying about your teacher having your back, that, how important that is. And I think in my development at that point, I had a similar relationship with those teachers, and it came to that where I had that relationship and I could say one-on-one, I think you're wrong on this. And I appreciated that. I think sometimes, especially with academia, what some of them have to put out in public, I don't know that it always is exactly what they personally think. I'm not speaking for any of them, but I just think that, Yeah. And maybe a lot of it came from like my experiences at Luther College, which is very forward thinking and very liberal when it comes to all of those things. And it was I mean, not that it's my job to accept, because it's not, but like acknowledging a queer person's, that they are a person and that they are just as valid and worthy as I am, like, was never in question for me, because they're people. Everyone is the same. We're all children of God. And it's like, and so pushing back at that for some of those professors where they profess that, but then they pull out these other things, it's very problematic for me. And I spent a lot of time pushing back against those things.
Yeah. I think in your era, you had these sort of, I think of like the two strongest, toughest people I know from Luther, in terms of Luther seminary grads, are both LGBT people, Margaret Mary Kelly and Scott Richards. You had to be tough like them to make it through.
I was gonna say, and two of my very best friends. So, yeah.
And I think I was too new. I was too new to Lutheranism, because I became Lutheran 10 years ago. Actually, 10 years ago next month is the event that they kicked me through the door. So I didn't have the strength that you're talking about. I would have just died.
And the other thing too, as somebody who, like, it sounds like you just did your MTH there.
Yeah.
I graduated my MTH in 2017, and then I went to LSTC for the PhD before I transferred to Tübingen.
But you did an MDiv or MA somewhere else other than
I did an MDiv at PLTS.
Yeah, and so the MTH, the thing that I found in particular about, like, even more so than my MA, was very isolating, because it's such a small program, and it's a small program to begin with, and the course load is very it's very condensed. I did mine over 3 years just because of where I was at mentally and emotionally, and all these things, or other things going on. But it was much harder for me if I hadn't had those relationships that I had built in terms of my MA. I don't know that I would have thrived in the same way. Thrived, as it were, quote unquote. Seminary was very difficult for me. It was 5.5 years of very difficult time. So yes,
it sounds like an experience. I'm an advocate. I mean, obviously now I have to always compare this to where I am now, because Tübingen is just different. But from the American perspective, I'm an advocate, if you want to study theology, of going to a seminary, at least for something. Maybe not what I did, which is jump to 3 of them and try to do my whole education there until, the Holy Spirit had other plans. So maybe not only do a seminary career, or a seminary track, but I'm an advocate for, if you want to do theology, to do it at some point in a setting where it is explicitly and unapologetically tied to the church, because that allows for the formation piece, which breaks down, not in the masculine sense, but I mean this more in the feminist sense, of it breaks down the false self in order that the true self emerges.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really the power of doing at least some training at a seminary.
Oh, for sure. Because the things that you do are so, your theology, your academics are so tied up with your faith. And it can't help but break you down and allow for something else to be brought forward. For sure. It definitely has served me well in the position I'm in now. I feel much more capable of talking about the things that I'm talking about, and then also being able to, mentor and be a good presence for young people. So,
speaking of,
I was just going to say, how was that for you transferring from, or translating from this academic formation, an MA and an MTH, to the practical youth ministry?
I guess I've always looked at my seminary training as even the way that I write is more geared towards the practical, and so I would say that making that move was both easy and difficult. It was difficult in that when you're on a certain track in seminary, you get that kind of those blinders where you're kind of a snot about the fact that, oh, you look down on CYF, you know, that kind of thing. just like look back, I'm like, what?
Explain for our listeners, please, those who did not go to Luther Seminary, what CYF is.
So Children, Youth, and Family Ministry. So there was a lot of like from, you know, our high place on our soapbox of being academic, like looking down at the practical. Oh, I'm so superior, and it's like, oh my God, I was such an idiot.
Yeah, even I don't understand why in retrospect, but even some of the MDivs kind of looked down on CYF.
Oh, exactly. And you're like, and when you get into the practical, and you're like, oh God, they know so much. They are what is going to save the church, literally, because none of the other stuff is going to work.
You know, the nickname is Children, Youth, and Frolicking, right?
Yeah, we don't do an awful lot of frolicking, though. So, yeah. But then at the same time, like I had always gone into my academic career hoping to teach at a college level and to do, to be able to have the kinds of relationships that I had with my college professors. I had a college professor who was my religion professor, Lindsay Johnson-DeBoffrey. She's at Drew University now.
Mm-hmm.
But she was very...
beautiful campus.
She was very like a big part of my faith formation, and then my my major at Luther College was Latin and Greek, and classics professor Byron Stayskull he's at Bellingham, Western Washington University in Bellingham, Washington now, and like the relationship, he literally saved my life. Like I was in such a difficult place with my mental health that like he literally saved my life. So I was hoping to kind of be able to give back in that sense. My dad was an elementary school teacher, and so I've always wanted to be a teacher. And so this actually worked out to my benefit. God had a good plan because it put us closer to my family. Honestly, with the way academics is now, I have probably better pay and better benefits than I would as a college professor. I have, you know, because a lot of the positions are adjunct.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and now, especially with our, with the longevity that I've had, I've been there for 5 years, and I've stuck it out through some very difficult times, and turnover. And so I've built up a lot of trust and relationships with the people that I serve and that I work with. A new lead pastor that we have who has been there for a little over a year. He has stepped into working with myself and I have a full-time colleague as well who's a deacon of faith formation. And she and I have been working together for the 5 years. And so the pastor came in and like, he knew us from before. He works with us. Like he's closer to my age than my parents' age, and so it's been a very good move for me, and it was actually pretty easy because I'm doing the same sorts of things, and I get to do even more fun stuff, and I don't have to get dressed up. I'm a youth.
Right.
My uniform is pastored or ordained. I spent a lot of time in seminary hearing from a few different people. Never Stephen Paulson. From a couple other, because he understood, but from a couple others who shall remain nameless. But basically, who said that I should switch and become an MDiv so that I fall back position to academia. I've never felt being a pastor is my calling. I've always felt that my calling and my vocation is to teach. And even though I'm very educated, like I think like my website, my blog is literally the overeducated girl. Yeah. So I feel very
on this podcast then.
I feel very passionate about the fact that I think that people need to understand that to do ministry, you do not have to be ordained. You do not have to be rostered. Mm-hmm. So I feel that's really important.
Right, which is something I've really been
pietist.
Yeah, that's something I've really been struggling with since getting de-rostered.
Yeah. And Brach, what did you say about?
Oh, I said the notion that you don't have to be ordained to do ministry. That's the best of the German pietist tradition, I think. I
don't think anybody's ever called me a pietist before, but thank you.
Well, I'm not necessarily saying you're a pietist, but
No,
I'm saying the roots of that are Spainer's reading of the priesthood of all believers.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, it's a very German reading of it. Like that, definitely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how are you doing with youth ministry and all of this in the time of social distancing and quarantine and all that?
Oh, you're going to keep us on topic, Peter.
I'm going to try.
It's been a challenge for sure. It's been I think the blessing of being in a congregation that's not huge but is big enough to support its staff in terms of making sure that like we're getting paid and that we have access to things like, we were able to say like right away, like, and our leadership, our council is very supportive in saying like, okay, well, we need to pay for Zoom and we need to help you figure out, the best, like, how can we make your videos better? Our pastor is doing, like, he literally has a podcasting video set up in his living room / office for setting up worship. And like, he has gone into the church a couple times and done some videoing in order to have that background in some of those pieces, but then he's putting it all together and learning. And our students, we basically have just tried to be very supportive. We're trying to live out the modeling of social distancing and staying at home. In Minnesota, we have the stay-at-home order through the 4th of May, which basically is the end of our program year. Mm-hmm. But and the thing is 2020 has been such a terrible thing in general, because like in February, at the very end of February, we lost one of our 6th grade students who was 12 to suicide. And like literally like a couple of weeks before we had the stay-at-home order, my colleague and I were at the school, counseling and doing all those things. We had her funeral. We were just sort of trying to like get back on our feet when all of this started to happen. And so it's like we had already kind of been really, especially with confirmation, had really been like easing back because of that, because her older sister is in our confirmation program. And so we'd kind of been easing back and it had been affecting everyone. And so we sort of switched over to Google Classroom. I am not meeting weekly with my confirmation students. I did one check-in. I have 52 7th and 8th graders.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I did a check-in with them, and 38 of them showed up to the Zoom call. And so literally the entire time was just highs and lows and checking in on how everybody was doing, which is really all I wanted to do. But it's not set up for that kind of stuff.
Right.
It's been cool to see how people respond. We are doing one service on Sunday mornings that our pastor puts together. We have a Holden evening prayer that we're doing on Tuesday evenings, which has been cool.
Oh, cool.
And then he's doing a Tuesday morning Bible study. Wednesday evening, we are doing a interactive worship service on Facebook Live that my colleague Amanda Sabelko and I have been trading back and forth on.
Okay.
And so we're doing that through Spark House. It's a summer program they have called Journey Together that we're utilizing. Mm-hmm. And then we're doing a cool like Bible and Brew thing on Thursday evenings. It's a Zoom call, and it's been great conversation. So people are engaging in different ways. The biggest struggle, I think, for youth ministry has been just the engagement. Like, the kids are there. I can see them looking at things, but they're not responding. And so I'm just doing what I normally do, which is doing ministry of presence, basically. Mm. Like, I'm there. I'm sharing things. Right next to me on my desk, I literally have like a stack of note cards that I'm going to like write notes to each of them. A couple weeks ago, I sent out things to all my 9th graders. I'm working through my seniors. I've been ordering things like stickers and stuff like that to send them in the mail. We are trying to shift gears for the summer. Like right now, our energy would be on summer anyway. when all this happened, we had to kind of step back with our fundraisers. So that was kind of hard, but we are going through our summer program with YouthWorks. And we were supposed to take a group to New Orleans and a group to Duluth. Well, neither one of those is happening. We're shifting to doing a hometown trip where either they'll come to us, or if it doesn't work out, we're just going to do it ourselves anyway, but do service in our own community. And just find, we have lots of service partners, but how can we partner with different people in the area and help them however can. We've been trying to do a lot more hands-on stuff with our students. I've been slowly making changes with confirmation anyway to accommodate all the things you end up competing with, whether it's school, sports, other family things like sports outside of school, which are even harder to compete with because they don't follow the things that the high school board puts up. And so they have sports on Mondays or on Wednesday evenings, and we're trying to, so we're going to be not doing any of our normal programming in June, which is normally every week of June is something else. And we're trying to push things back, but we're just looking at different ways we can continue our engagement going forward, so that we are not doing all this now and then everything. I don't think anything's going to change for quite a while, like the next year or so. But all of a sudden we can get back together, and then now we're not engaging in a regular way. So we're trying to figure out ways that we can keep this momentum moving forward. And just trying to touch base with them where we can and just show that we're here. And that's really the best thing we can do.
I think Zoom is really incredible for that sense of connection. It's not the same, obviously, as physical connection. But then again, Peter and I haven't seen one another in how many years, Peter?
3?
Yeah. Almost 3. It'll be 3 to Thanksgiving. Well, American Thanksgiving.
Yeah. So 2.5 years.
2.5.
Well,
and I still feel deeply connected to you. So
right. Well, and we're very lucky that we have these outlets because so early on in this, so our synod has a faith formation network that is very active and does a monthly meeting. And so the first meeting that we had when this all happened was the same week as the shutdown. And there is a counselor here, a therapist here in Rochester who does a lot of stuff with like mental health advocacy, and she's connected to a lot of us. And so I went over to her office and she did a Facebook Live for our group. And we talked about all of these things, like how, this is not the same, but it's better than nothing. And, we've done a lot of different things, whether it's Zoom. We had recently moved all of our programming stuff to, or our email server and stuff to G Suite. And so now we have access to like Google Meet, which is just a step up from Hangouts. And the thing that's keeping me sane is the Marco Polo app, actually. One of my friend calls it Snapchat for old people, but I'm not. I'm still learning Snapchat. I have to go to my students, and I have one student who's very active, who's a senior, and I'm like, I'm gonna need a tutorial again. So, yeah, just trying those different things and utilizing what we can. So, we're tonight. We have a worship and music meeting tonight, and we're going to start planning for when we come back together and what that's going to look like. And we may be outside around our fire pit. Everybody we have a fire pit that an Eagle Scout put in for us a couple of years ago that we use during the summer and things. And
cool.
We may be outside sitting in our lawn chairs or on our lawn blankets doing worship outdoors from now on for the summer. So,
and somehow keeping the social distancing rules, of course.
Right, exactly. So, yeah. But it's been amazing how many people, I think it says a lot about the community that I'm in there. When all of this happened, just everybody wanting to help. Like, how can we be of service to other people? And that's been amazing. So, yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Do you guys have other questions I can help answer? Or I don't know.
Well, I'm kind of curious. I mean, somebody that does these highly academic degrees, right? Because you would have done 2 master dissertations, right? You did an MA dissertation and an MTH dissertation, right?
Yep. And for my MTH, did a Latin language exam.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, you already had Latin in college, so that couldn't have been too hard.
Oh, it was harder than I really like to admit, but yes.
Yeah, it's just like it's been since high school for me with Latin. So I actually found my copy of Winnie Illa Pooh
Oh, nice.
today, and I like opened it up, and I was like, yeah, no, never mind.
I did okay, but I love my I always went back to what my professor from college, Byron, said. He would say, timed exams are not an indication of what you know. Like, it's just not. Like, nowhere in anywhere are you ever going to be asked to translate something in a certain amount of time. Like, that's just not a thing. It's not a good indication of who you are as an academic. And I'm like, okay, that makes me feel better.
Yeah.
Well, that's sort of how I feel, because in my MT I took German, and then when I went to LSTC for the PhD, the first part of the PhD is the THM. So I actually got another THM degree from them, but I had to do a language. Well, they didn't take my stuff from Luther Seminary, so out of anger and spite, maybe not spite, but and maybe not even anger, disappointment, more like, I did German again. And I thought, this is so unrealistic. And funny thing was that Luther, I passed my German exam on the first try. Passed it very well, actually, on my first try. In LSTC, I was failed the first time.
Interesting.
So how do you balance that, right? And I passed it the second time, and then came to Germany, and now learning how to speak German. Oh, yeah. I had German in college as well. Oh, God, that's 10 years ago. It was the last time. I mean, the college German doesn't really count. But so now learning German as a living language, and I'm taking all these German classes and actually, reading German, just picking up academic texts and reading German. Now, I still need a dictionary, obviously, and all that. But presumably, 5 years from now, God willing, I will read systematic theology in German without any problem. And it will just be as I was reading it.
And that right there is why I study dead languages, because my brain works really well when it comes to seeing the big picture, being able to translate, but the speaking connection between my and my tongue is just not a thing.
Yeah, the conversation German I find a little daunting. So my doctor father is Jörg Mullen. Yes, and when I meet with him, we speak mostly in German with each other. And it took me well, he actually had me speaking German with him after I'd only been here for 2 months, and I wasn't even officially his student yet. I was his student at LSTC, not his student in Tübingen. And he was making me, he handed me 2.2 of Karl Barth's Church Dogmatics and said, read the first 100 pages 3 weeks from now. That was how I learned German. So he, given the adventure that he is, he started speaking German with me after I'd only been here, about 2 months. But now, when I call him, I speak in German. But I have to use a mix of German and English. There's certain words that I just can't remember or don't know, one of the two. But my hope also is that as the reading level increases, the confidence with speaking increases. The biggest thing I've learned from being an international student in Germany for a year, and I have to remember this every day, actually. Learning a new language is not ultimately about intelligence. It's about courage.
Yes, that is true.
And I learned that from Dr. Mullen, because I told him, I said, this was last summer, I said, I have fear when I'm speaking German. And he said, well, if you have fear, then you should learn courage.
There you go.
And Mut, like a cow. Mut is the German word for courage. And that, I think, in terms of languages, I wish, Peter and I've talked about this before, but since both of you are trained in Latin, and I'm still trying to scrape by in Latin, because as a Tübingen student, I have to have Latin, Hebrew, and Greek. I wish Latin was taught like a spoken language. And Peter had that, didn't you, Peter?
I did. Through about 10th grade, I had that.
Yeah.
6th through 10th grade.
Lindsay, was Latin spoken at Luther, or was it a reading language?
It was a reading language for the most part, but my teacher taught it differently than most people learn it. He wrote his own textbook, and it was much easier to learn. And then I also learned Greek that way. And then when I did Hebrew at seminary with Dr. Throntveit, that was strict. That was mostly for reading purposes. And like, we did do some things out loud, but it was for the most part to be able to use the books to translate. That was kind of his goal.
Yep.
So Yeah.
Doesn't that change how you approach a language, though, if it's primarily for translating versus a living way? You know, when I, like, for instance, what did I read recently? I guess it was Oswald Bayer's book on systematic theology, which you might like, Lindsay, since you were Paulson's student and Paulson loves Bayer.
I have quite a bit of Bayer, yeah.
Yeah, I spent an evening with him in January, by the way, and I have to say he's lovely, and he's not nearly as conservative as his followers. But anyway, that's a separate point. So I think that was the last thing that I actually tried to plow through just in German. But it's so different when I was reading that. By the way, in English, that's theology the Lutheran way. But in German, it's just Theologie. And I was plowing through that. It was so different from when I was translating German. Because I wasn't looking every word up. I was reading for the sense of it, like you would an English book. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know. I don't know if you work with Latin like that, but
I don't know. I guess for me, like, since I primarily think of myself as a writer, like it's less of a problem for me because I'm not a linguist when it comes to being able to speak things. Like, even when I took Spanish, I was terrible at Spanish. So, yeah. I have a couple more minutes, and then we literally we're going to go get our groceries, pick up our groceries we ordered ahead of time for
fun.
No contact stuff.
So what would you say, Lindsay, for you then, as our last question to you? What is the most challenging part of youth ministry? And then what is the best part of youth ministry?
I would say the most challenging thing about youth ministry is having to compete with all of the other things. It will be very interesting to see what happens after all of this is done, quote unquote. I feel like the families that I engage with, like, some of the things that I'm hearing from some of them is they're able to refocus a little bit more, and that's been good. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes forward when some of those activities reconvene. Like, where will they put their energy? But that is probably the biggest challenge I have. Like, and I understand because I'm a parent, and right now, like, I mean, he's in preschool, but I'm literally having to, like, juggle 2 preschools and special ed stuff for language. And it's like, it's a lot while working full time. So I can understand where they struggle. But I'm waiting to see what happens, because that has been a big struggle for me. I think the thing that's been the greatest joy has been the relationships that I've been able to build with people, whether it's the students or parents. I have this volunteer who I work with on a variety of levels. She is a grandparent to a couple of my confirmation students. Her daughter is a social worker at the school. They're very involved. She volunteers in the office. She's on my Mission Outreach Commission. But she is someone that I can go to, can have a conversation, and she doesn't bring the problem that she doesn't want to somehow help me find a solution for. She holds confidences. She values what I do. I've never felt so valued in a community before. Whether that's, I mean, one of the things that came out of the February stuff, and unfortunately it's not the first suicide we've dealt with in our community, of a young person. But just knowing that what I'm doing, there are glimpses of moments when I can see that what I'm doing is making a difference. Oftentimes in ministry, we don't see what our work, what benefits it's going to reap. And I've been able to actually get glimpses of that, and that's been wonderful. So, yeah. That's
awesome.
And the fact that my family has been welcomed in. My husband is, as he likes to say, a recovering Catholic. But my husband actually became a member at this congregation. He volunteers on Wednesday evenings. He's a chef, and so he runs our Wednesday night community meals.
Oh, cool.
Does all the ordering and stuff. My son loves being there. He goes to preschool there. It's like his second home. So that's been good, especially considering the difficulties I had as a child in my own upbringing and feeling welcome. So, yeah.
I guess I have one more question for you that I just thought of.
Sure.
What are you reading right now that gives you hope?
Oh. Well, right now, the thing that I am reading that is in particular giving me hope is a book called Canoeing the Mountains, Ministry in Uncharted Territory. It's Todd Bolsinger, I think is his last name. He is at Fuller Seminary at the Youth Institute there. So really anything done by him or Kara Powell when it comes to like the growing young stuff. They just have very specific ways to lead that is very helpful. Our leadership is reading the Canoeing the Mountains, and I did a continuing ed thing up in Edina last winter that he led. And it's just the church realizing that we can't go backward. Mm-hmm. And I love, it's really interesting because he's putting it in the perspective of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Mm-hmm. And so it's very interesting and very timeless, I think, which is cool.
Cool.
So,
well, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for putting out the opportunity. This was fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it was good to reconnect, Peter, and it's nice to meet you, Brach.
Yes, lovely to meet you. Come back and see us again, will you?
Oh, for sure. I'm gonna have to find your podcast and listen. I'm an avid podcast listener, so I always need another one to pay attention to. So
there you go.
Awesome.
We are so grateful for that.
Well, thanks, you guys.
Yes.
We'll talk to you later.
Yep.
Yes, Lindsay Colwell, we wish you the best. And
Thank you.
Until we record next, I'm Brach Jennings.
And I'm Peter Clark.
And this is your friendly neighborhood Lutheran theology podcast, Stumbling Block.
Stumbling Block is a production of Silver Turkey Studios. Our Patreon producer is Ben Dittman, our executive producer is Peter Clark, and our executive director is Brach Jennings. Our theme music is by Mirrors for Windows, and we are hosted by Podbean. We can be reached by email at stumblingblockpodcast@gmail.com. Please consider supporting us at patreon.com/stumblingBlock. And as always, thank you for listening.